السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والتابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. My dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, welcome back to another weekly Seerah Halaqah, where we discuss the life of the Prophet ﷺ and the early Muslims. The weeks before, we had discussed the year of sorrow and how difficult the 10th year of prophethood had been for the Prophet ﷺ, that the Prophet of Allah lost his greatest pillars of support. And thereafter, the Quraysh had started intensifying their persecutions upon the Prophet ﷺ. The week before that, we had covered the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ to Sauda bint Zam'a radiallahu ta'ala anha, his first wife that he married after Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, who was a widowed woman, and she was a believer, one of the earlier believers in the Prophet ﷺ, the earlier Muslims. And he also, at the same time, marries Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. But obviously, the marriage is consummated when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrates to Medina Munawwara. So we see that, and then we talked a little bit about how the different types of harassments that the Prophet ﷺ had to face from the Quraysh, and seeing that level of persecution, seeing that level of torture being rendered upon the Muslims. And now also the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he requests permission from the Prophet ﷺ to migrate to Abyssinia. And while he was on his way there, we said that he met Ibn Dughunna, who was a chieftain of the tribes that were outside of Makkah Mukarramah. And this person actually came to the protection of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and he brought him back to Makkah. And Abu Bakr at this point had been worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Quraysh were unsatisfied with his worship, and they proceeded to tell Ibn Dughunna that he should remove his protection because he was now becoming a nuisance for the Quraysh. And Ibn Dughunna actually came to Abu Bakr and he took his protection back, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu decided to put his faith and his reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected him in that way. So now we move on to the third phase, right? The first phase was where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right after receiving the first revelation, the Prophet of Allah, for 3 years he secretly called the people, right? And then we have from year number 4 until year 10, this is when the Prophet ﷺ is calling all of the inhabitants of Makkah Mukarramah itself towards Islam. The third phase now begins towards the ending of the Prophet ﷺ's 10th year of Nubuwah, after the passing away of Abu Jahl, after the passing away of Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, and the different indifference and persecution and tortures that he was facing from the people of Makkah, from the Quraysh. The Prophet of Allah decided to take the da'wah beyond Makkah now, right? And this is now what the historians will call the third phase, right? Because this is what lays down the groundwork for the eventual hijrah and the migration that the Prophet ﷺ ends up making from Makkah Mukarramah towards Medina Munawwara. So in this stage, in this phase, the first city that he migrated towards, or the first city that he looked towards, was a city called the city of Taif, right? This city was about 50 miles from Makkah Mukarramah, and the city of Taif was inhabited by a powerful tribe and clan called the Banu Thaqif. Banu Thaqif was actually a distant relation to the Prophet ﷺ in the way that the Prophet of Allah, because he had nursed in the tribe of Banu Sa'd had familial ties with Banu Thaqif, right? And so the people of Thaqif, they were sort of the maternal uncles of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet of Allah, he sought out this city, he sought out the Banu Thaqif because they were known for their influence and their power and their economic prosperity as well. So the Prophet of Allah, because he had this familial link with them, he thought that let me approach them and let me see if I can garner their support against, the persecutions of the Quraysh. And maybe they will stand with me, maybe they will accept this da'wah, maybe they will become a support for me, and I will be able to spread my da'wah and my mission. But what happens is that when the Prophet ﷺ actually travels to the city of Taif, and this journey took place on the 27th of Shawwal in the 10th year of prophethood, right? This is right after he marries Sauda bint Zam'a radiallahu ta'ala anha, and he decides to take this journey. He travels all the way on foot to this city, and he travels also back on foot, and he takes with him his Mawla, his adopted son Zayd bin Haritha radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he was the only person that accompanied the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam on this journey. So the Prophet of Allah, he approaches the main leaders in the city, right? And this was the influential family of Umayr, right? Umayr al-Thaqafi was a famous leader that had passed away, but he was famous. He was known for his nobility. He was known for his influence, and this person was a person that had held the leadership in Taif itself. So the Prophet ﷺ approaches his grandsons, and they were three brothers, right? One of them, his name was Abd Yalayl, the other one was Mas'ud, and the third one was Habib. So their lineage is actually Abd Yalayl bin Amr bin Umayr, right? So they were the grandsons of Umayr al-Thaqafi. So the Prophet ﷺ, he comes to them and he approaches them because instead of going to the common folk first, the strategy demanded that you should go to the leaders first, because most of the times if the leaders are accepting of an idea, then that passes on to the common people. So the Prophet ﷺ decided to use that approach. So he approaches them, and subhanallah, instead of accepting and honoring the Prophet ﷺ, not only just as a prophet of Allah, but also one of their distant kinsmen, distant relative, they completely mistreat him, right? So one of them says that's he says that هو يمرط ثياب الكعبة إن كان الله أرسلك, right? That it is akin to tearing the cloth of the Kaaba, right? If Allah has sent you as a prophet, right? So he thought, to him, that the tearing of the cloth of the Kaaba was a very, very great crime, that a person would tear the cloth of the Kaaba and they would throw it away and they would desecrate the sacred house like this. So he made this proclamation by saying that there's no way possible that you can be a prophet of Allah, right? So he disrespected the Prophet ﷺ in this way, and the ulama, they say that for him, disrespecting the Kaaba was bigger than disrespecting the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet of Allah, and disrespecting the Prophet of Allah in such a way that he not only was verbally abusive to him, but he also sent the common folk of that town to go and persecute and throw rocks on the Prophet ﷺ. Like, he didn't consider that to be more, he didn't consider that to be worse than desecrating the Kaaba itself. The other brother said that, didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala find anyone else besides you to send as his prophet? And the third person responded and he said that, I'm not going to talk to you, because if you are truly a prophet of Allah, to ignore you would be, would invite, like really terrible circumstances. And if you're lying about Allah and you're saying that you're a prophet, whereas in reality you're not a prophet, then why should I even waste my time with you? Right? So, subhanAllah, this is the way that he was, mistreated. He was completely shunned. And the Prophet ﷺ, as the historians they record, that he stayed in the city of Taif for about 10 days. And there wasn't a single leader, a single person of influence, a single person who had some sort of standing in society, that the Prophet ﷺ approached this person. And the Prophet of Allah read the Quran to them. And the Prophet ﷺ gave them da'wah. And the Prophet ﷺ requested their assistance in his mission, for their support in being able to establish his mission. And not a single person responded to him, right? Not a single person responded to him. And subhanallah, when the Prophet ﷺ, after 10 days of making an effort, when the Prophet ﷺ became despondent that these people are not going to accept the message, these people are not going to, budge, the Prophet ﷺ made a simple request of them. And he said that, the way that you've treated me, on this journey, you've treated me. But at least do me this favor, don't relay what has happened over here to the Quraysh. Because the Prophet ﷺ thought to himself that if Quraysh has to hear how Banu Thaqif and the people of Taif mistreated the Prophet ﷺ, it would embolden the Quraysh even more to mistreat the Prophet ﷺ, right? And the Quraysh would ramp up their efforts, and they would ramp up their persecution. So the Prophet ﷺ did not want that to happen. And subhanAllah, this request of his was even disregarded. They didn't even have any regard for this. So the Prophet ﷺ, as he was leaving, one of those brothers of the grandsons of Umair, one of them was actually married to a woman from Banu Amir, which is a tribe, which was a tribe from the Quraysh. So the Prophet ﷺ, as he exits the house, he remarks to that lady and he says that, what type of a treatment have I received from your in-laws? Like, just, incredulously remarking that what type of people are these people that, not only do they not show any regard for me being the Prophet of Allah, but me even as a guest, as a distant relative, even then they did not even honor me. They did not even treat me well. Because this was something that was expected, that even though the people were at odds with the Prophet ﷺ, they were always warring and fighting with one another. The generosity and being kind to strangers, being kind to travelers, being kind to those people that were your relatives, this was something that was really big, right? It was a really common thing amongst them. They would vie with one another. They would compete with one another on who could, feed people more, on who could, show their generosity more and more. But instead of these chieftains doing this, they actually completely mistreated the Prophet ﷺ in this way. And they not only rejected the request of the Prophet ﷺ, but they really, they told him to get out of their city. And what they did was, they also took their slaves, and they took all of their urchins, right? The people, the common lowly folk of the city, right? The complete common rabble of the city. They took these people and they incited them against the Prophet ﷺ, that chase him out. And it is related that, subhanAllah, there were two lines, right, that were made, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, as he was leaving, there were people on two sides. And they began to mock the Prophet ﷺ. They began to jeer at him. They would spit at him. and they began to stone him, subhanallah. And every time the Prophet ﷺ would raise his feet, they would stone him. Every time he would put it down, they would stone him. And every time, because of those stonings, if the Prophet of Allah would trip and he would fall, they would lift him back up and laugh at him and continue to stone him. Subhanallah, it is related that he was stoned so much that his feet became his shoes became clogged with blood, right? His feet was covered with blood, his Mubarak feet, and subhanallah. And in this way, subhanallah, it is related that they almost chased the Prophet ﷺ and Zayd bin Haritha radiallahu ta'ala anha, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, almost about 2 to 3 miles outside of the city, right? So for about 2 to 3 miles outside of the city, they continued to chase him, they continued to mistreat him in this way, subhanallah. And Zayd bin Haritha radiallahu ta'ala anhu tried to defend the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He tried to shield him with his body, but what happened was there was a rock that came and that struck his head, and unfortunately after that he was not able to do that anymore. So the Prophet ﷺ, in this condition, he came across the orchard of the two sons of Rabi'ah, right? Their names were Utbah and Shayba, right? And the Prophet of Allah goes to this orchard had walls. So when he entered into this orchard, the people, this rabble that was chasing him, they left, right? Because they didn't want to encroach upon somebody else's property. And the Prophet ﷺ, in this bloodied state, right, he goes and he takes shade underneath a tree, and subhanallah, he composes himself, and out of sorrow and sadness, the Prophet ﷺ makes this really, really powerful dua, subhanallah. He says, Allahumma inni ashku ilayka du'fa quwwati wa qillata hilati wa hawani ala nas. He said, subhanallah, he said that, "O God, I complain to you of my weakness and my lack of ability and the disdain of the people." He says, Ya arhamar rahimin, anta rabbul mustad'afin wa anta rabbi, ila man takilani, ila ba'idin yatajahhamani, am ila aduwin mallaktahu amri. That, O Allah, you are the Lord of those, you are the Lord of the weak, and you are my Lord. To whom have you left me, right? To the distant one who scowls at me, meaning that the people of Taif, right, who were his distant relatives. So they were a distant. Have you left me to the distant one who scowls at me, or to an enemy who controls my affairs, meaning the Quraysh? The Prophet ﷺ had no other refuge besides them, right? He was either going to be in Mecca, or he had come to sought protection in Taif. So both places the Prophet ﷺ was suffering. So he's saying that, Ya Allah, who have you left me? You've left my affairs in the hands of these types of people, Ya Allah. One of them is a very distant, distant, like relative, distant person. This person is not even from my family, and this person, he looks at me with disdain, and he scowls at me, and he completely refuses my message. And the other person is like the proper enemy, right? Ila aduwin mallaktahu amri. You've left me to the devices of the Quraysh, who are my clear enemy, and they have completely taken up this persecution against me. And then he says that, إِن لَمْ يَكُنْ بِكَ عَلَيَّ غَضَبٌ فَلَا أُبَالِي وَلَكِنَّ عَافِيَتَكَ أَوْسَعُ لِي. He said that if you have no displeasure towards me, then I care not. Ya Allah, what matters to me the most is that I do not draw your anger and your displeasure. If you're not displeased with me, Ya Allah, I don't care, right? I am okay with my lot. I'm okay with the suffering that I have to go through, whether it's in Taif, whether it's in Mecca, as long as you are not angry with me. ولكن عافيتك أوسع لي. But at the same time, Ya Allah, your protection is more expansive for me, right? This is something that is more better for me. Ya Allah, if you choose to give me afiyah, if you choose to extend to me your protection, this is something that is better for me. أعوذ بوجهك أعوذ بنور وجهك الذي أشرقت له الظلمات وصلح عليه أمر الدنيا والآخرة. Uh, he said that I seek the refuge in the light of your countenance, in the light of your face, through which the darkness is lit up, right? Through which the darkness is lit up, and the affairs of this world and the next are put right. Uh, uh, he is seeking the protection. He's seeking the nur, the protection of the nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through which the heavens and the earth are lit up, and through which the affairs of the dunya and the hereafter are sorted out. What is he seeking refuge from? He said that min an tunzila bi ghadabuk, right? That your wrath should descend upon me, that your anger should descend upon me. Meaning that the Prophet ﷺ in his desperation is making such a dua that, Ya Allah, please don't be angry with me. Even though I failed in my mission, even though I was not successful, Ya Allah, I seek your refuge that your anger should descend upon me, that I am treated in this way, or that my condition becomes in this way. Min an tunzila bi ghadabuk aw yahilla alayya sakhatuk, or that I deserve or I become deserving of your displeasure, right? لك العتبى لك العتبى حتى ترضى ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بك. Ya Allah, I will continue to always seek your satisfaction until you are pleased, right? That is going to be my most important mission in life, to seek your pleasure until you are pleased. And there is no ability